You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another terrifying episode of Halloweek. So tonight's episode is all about one of my favorite TV shows of all time. That show being the original The Twilight Zone. Now there's a bunch of reasons why I love this show. I think it was way ahead of its time, totally pushing boundaries with its themes of religion, death, the unknown, politics, and just the overall directing when family sitcoms pretty much ruled the air. But anyways, one of the things about The Twilight Zone is that it can be pretty scary at times, but every once in a while you're in for quite the spook. And for tonight's episode, I've rounded up my top 5 scariest episodes of The Twilight Zone. And I'm only including the original 5 seasons of the original series. Oh yeah, and minor spoilers up ahead. I'm gonna try not to spoil the endings because that's what makes The Twilight Zone so great, but I feel like it would be kind of hard for me to talk about these without spoiling anything. So if you have a very low tolerance for spoilers and you really want to watch these, then you might want to skip this one. However, if you don't care and you enjoy a good spook, then stick around. Also, another thing about this list is that I'm going to rate every episode with a scare meter. The scare meter pretty much just tells you how scary the episode is on a scale from 1 to 10. Anyways, let's finally get into this. Number 5.
Heading west?
No!
At number 5, we have The Hitchhiker. So basically, this episode is about a woman who's on a road trip, and she keeps seeing the same hitchhiker no matter how far she goes. Now, this concept in itself is pretty spooky, but I think what makes this episode extra unsettling is some of the realism to it. Okay, so here's the thing. Everybody has to have a slight fear of being followed. I mean, being followed by somebody is definitely, I'd imagine, not a great experience, and can be quite horrifying. So there's already the anxiety of having somebody follow you. But on top of that, you have other events in this episode that can kind of send you the tingles. There's a part where the woman stalls her car on a train track while the train is approaching. Also, while having the hitchhiker on the other side of the tracks just standing there looking at her. Now, I didn't expect her to die, but I definitely thought the tension in this scene was very, very high. Another scene that caught my attention was when her car runs out of gas in the middle of the woods. I mean, we already know this man is just appearing out of nowhere wherever she goes, and he could be literally anywhere around her. And here she is out of gas in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night. Imagine being stuck in the woods at night with some teleporting guy following you. Some pretty creepy stuff. But overall, even though this is one of the scariest episodes of The Twilight Zone, I'd say it definitely pales in comparison to some of the following ones that I'm going to mention. And this one gets a scare meter of about 6 out of 10. Moving on to number 4.
My name is Dottie Tina, and I'm going to kill you.
I'm Talking Tina, and I hate you. At number 4, we have Living Doll. Now, a lot of people go to cite this as the scariest episode of The Twilight Zone. Although I do admit it is pretty bone-chilling, I don't think it's the scariest. That being said, it's very frightening. This one's basically about this little girl who gets this doll from an antique store, and it's like one of those pull-string dolls that like say something when you pull the string. And usually when it's around the little girl, it says like normal things like, I'm Talking Tina, and I want to play with you, or whatever. But then the dad, who doesn't like the doll, starts to hear different things when the doll starts to talk. Things like, I'm Talking Tina, and you shouldn't have done that. Or, I'm Talking Tina,
and I'm going to kill you.
It's some pretty frightening stuff. Also, the fact that the doll is pretty much invincible is kind of also spooky. But yeah, overall, the scare meter for this thing, it gets a 7 out of 10. Number 3. At number 3, we have Night Call. Now, this is another episode that, although quite unrealistic, the realism sense to it kind of scares you. Allow me to further explain. So basically, this episode is about this woman who keeps getting these calls, and at first they're static, but then eventually some guy starts answering, and he's like, hello, hello, hello? And he just keeps repeating hello. And it's pretty damn creepy because this woman keeps getting these calls in the middle of the night. She lives by herself and she's old. Oh yeah, and she's disabled, by the way. She can't move her legs. So just the realism of having some creep call you like non-stop, especially in the middle of the night, is pretty damn creepy. I'm not going to spoil the end because I think it's a really good ending. Kind of sad, actually. But it does take a turn for the more unrealistic, and it gets a little less scary towards the end once you find out who's calling her. And like I said, it's pretty sad. But yeah, this episode overall, just because of the uncanniness of getting calls from a stalker or whatever, someone you don't know, and then being really weird on the telephone, this one gets a 7 out of 10. Moving on to number 2.
It was ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the sensation. I kept thinking there's somebody back there. I'll look in the rearview mirror and I'll see his face. Then I'll see his hands reaching up.
At number 2, we have actually my all-time favorite Twilight Zone episode, Perchance to Dream. Now, the reason this is my all-time favorite Twilight Zone episode is because the directing and the writing is just absolutely fantastic. Seriously, watch this episode. That being said, though, it's also pretty damn spooky at the same time. So it pretty much opens with this guy and a psychiatrist or something, some sort of doctor, and he has a heart problem, and he's like struggling to stay awake, like sweating and all this, breathing very heavily, and he tells the doctor that he's afraid to go to sleep because if he goes to sleep, then he knows it's gonna kill him. And of course, the doctor thinks he's crazy. But the whole idea is that he has these dreams, and these dreams take place in a carnival, which at times can be very, very frightening. Like the dream sequences in this are pretty freaking spooky. But basically, yeah, there's this girl in this circus that keeps getting him super excited, and because of his heart problem, he thinks that she's going to kill him, like in his dream, but he's gonna die in real life. So not only in this episode do you have the fear of falling asleep, but you have just the really uncanny dream sequences in the circus, which again can get really spooky, especially towards the end. And another thing in this episode that was really small, but it really creeped me out, was a quote. So basically, the guy that's afraid to fall asleep is telling the doctor this story about how he was driving his car and he was like looking into the mirror and then he saw this woman from his dreams in the back seat. But what he said then like really kind of creeped me out. He said something along the lines of, have you ever looked at something long enough and you imagine something happening so hard that it might just actually happen? Like, I don't know, just let that sit in your mind for a little bit. But yeah, overall, I think this episode is pretty damn creepy. I give it on the scare meter 8 out of 10. Definitely watch it. It's my favorite Twilight Zone episode.
Secret, isn't it? Nobody knows but us. Can I have a chocolate ice cream bar?
At number 1, the scariest Twilight Zone episode of all time, in my opinion, is Long Distance Call. Now, there's a lot of things that make this one terrifying. One of the things is that the camera quality is strangely different. Like, it looks more like an old 1960s Christmas special than like an actual film. Like, they definitely downgraded with the camera budget or something with this episode. I don't know what it is. But just that alone kind of makes it feel weird. It almost makes it feel more real, to be honest. But anyways, basically what happens in this episode is there's this family and a little boy and the little boy's grandmother. And the grandmother isn't doing so well. She's got some health issues and she's gonna pass pretty soon. And what do you know? She dies. But the thing is, it actually shows her death, and it's like one of the most eerie deaths I've ever seen on a TV show. It's strangely realistic. The things she says before she dies is just really weird and creepy. But yeah, so she passes on in like a really creepy way. Oh yeah, another thing I forgot to mention is that for the kid's birthday or something, she gave him a gift, and the gift was a toy telephone. And she told him as long as he has that telephone, he'll always be able to talk to her. And the parents think this is like just a little cute gift. But anyways, after she passes on, the kid is talking in the telephone. And the parents are just like telling him to stop and stuff. Like, they're trying to help him cope with the loss because they were very close. But obviously they don't believe he's actually talking to her. But then he starts doing some weird shit, like, I don't know, going into traffic and almost dying, like doing some weird creepy kid shit. And then it's revealed that the grandmother is talking to him from the grave through the phone, and she's trying to get him to kill himself so he can be with her. This kid's like 5 years old. That's just like a super creepy plot. And one of the creepiest scenes is when the mother goes to pick up the phone and listen to it because she starts to suspect what's going on. And she just drops the phone in fear and you can't hear anything. You can't hear anything through the phone. But then she goes yelling and crying to her husband, saying she knows she was there because she could hear her breathing. Like this, just talking about this sends chills down my spine. This is a really frightening episode, and I think it's easily the scariest episode in the series. On the scare meter, I give this one a 9 out of 10. But anyways, that's my list for my top 5 scariest Twilight Zone episodes. Definitely go watch them. They're all on Netflix. And if you haven't watched the show, go watch it because it's seriously one of the best shows ever made, in my opinion. So yeah, that's all for tonight's episode of Halloweek, and I hope to see you tomorrow night. Stay spooky.